So welcome everybody to the final Bodhana presented panel for Save Against Fear 2020 or HashCon SafeCon hashtag SafeCon 2020. Whew. If we used Ric Flair as my example, I started the con very woo, and now I'm ending the con at the Ric Flair 3 steps falls on his face of his own accord. But after that extended metaphor that I'm loving that Travis loved, sincerely, this panel is probably one of the ones that's kind of very near and dear to my heart because I love the topic of empathy. I love the action that is involved with empathy and compassion. It's a very central tenet to the way that I try to live my life. And it's a fantastic topic to talk about within the gaming sphere. As usual, I want to thank all of our panelists assembled here and also those over the weekend who have given of their time and their genius and just all of their wonderful sharing all of their thoughts and making all of this information available to you. And as a reminder, if you have not yet, sign up on our YouTube channel, the Bodhana Group, to get access to all the content that you may have missed. Or if, hey, you want to go back and watch something that was great after the fact, all of the content, or as much as we can muster, that has been presented during Save Against Fear will be available for you. Give us about maybe a week or two to get it all synthesized and that good stuff. Without further ado, my thanks again for everyone attending Save Against Fear. It has been a blast this weekend, and we are already planning next year, as well as a 6-month interval for professionals. So thank you all for coming, and I will now hand you over to the capable hands of your moderator, Crystal. So, all right. Oh, thank you all as well. Be well. Have a great panel, okay? Oh, enjoy.
All right, so I want to welcome everybody to our panel on gaming, empathy in gaming. And the focus of this panel is going to be about how gaming can teach empathy and how we approach it from a game design perspective, and including empathy building, perspective talking, and how that would look at the gaming table and how that affects our players. So my name is Crystal Mazer. I am a freelance writer and game designer. I have worked on games such as Chicago by Night, Never Going Home. I am the lead developer for Pip System Primer from Third Eye Games. I've worked on a whole bunch of self-publishing stuff and a whole bunch of other stuff that I can't talk about right now. And then from by day, I'm an educator. I've worked with students from early education all the way up through, my current is middle school. So empathy and social emotional learning are really important for me. And I use games a lot for doing that. So I'm very excited to do this panel. So I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves because they are much better than I am. My pronouns, by the way, are she, her, and mix. Yeah, if I'm going to have Travis start off.
Thank you very much. My name is Travis Legge. I am a freelance writer and game designer. I do a lot of work with Onyx Path Publishing. I'm the line developer for their Starlands 5th edition role-playing game. And I also self-publish under Aegis Studios. All my stuff's available up at Drive-Thru RPG. My pronouns are he, him. There was something else I was going to say. I can't remember what it was. Oh, yeah, right. I also am the programming coordinator for the Onyx Path Twitch channel, and I run games on my own Twitch, which is Plast Gauge Plays.
Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Turner. I'm a game designer. I teach game design at DePaul University. I'm also a dancer, performer, writer, music maker, parent, educator. I get bored easily, so I keep picking up things to be. And as far as game design goes, I have been active in the video game industry for a long time, worked with Marvel, Disney, Wide Load, Bungie Software, and a bunch of stuff. And then I publish through my own publishing group, Council of Fools, Edgegour, the role-playing game, which is an indigenously focused horror, high fantasy horror game. And then, but at the same time, I spend a lot of time in my educational life doing things like teaching teachers how to do game-like learning in their classrooms, and then creating lots of introspective play tools, things to kind of get people working and talking and examining personal narratives, extracting those narratives from outside, from inside to the outside, and then having conversations about what they mean to them.
So do you remember when I said I have that fangirl moment and I start realizing putting all the pieces together? I just did that with you, Alan.
I forgot to mention that I also worked on Chicago by Night, so we have an overlap there.
Yeah, that's where I was like, wait a minute, I reckon. Oh my gosh, that is him.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that slowly, if you've watched my face, that slowly put those pieces in.
Yay! Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, Calvin.
Yeah, I am Calvin Johns. I design and publish games out of Anthropos Games, just a small little like co-op type game group that we put together. I've put out, I guess recently I've written for a couple of games for the Gauntlet Publishing out of Houston. Jason Cordova's new game, Brindlewood Bay, which is a really cool like murder mystery. Widow Book Club murder mystery game that's really great. That's based off of this mystery engine he just put together. And also published games like Early Dark, Fantagy, King Pink. I do a lot of live action games too, for like private companies and hospitals and things like that, for kind of like murder mystery events, I guess, that are just kind of like unique play experiences. Before I was, I guess earlier in life, in academia, I taught anthropology, and my research was in emergent cultures and sort of microcultures, which then focused on gaming, right? How like a game kind of makes a new space, makes new connections, reinscribes some structures, but creates structures of its own and produces bubbles and spaces within and between sort of larger cultural structures. And yeah, I think that's probably it here. Yeah, a lot of research into play and things, which really has me excited about talking about empathy and hearing from everyone today.
Awesome. And Senfang?
Hi, I'm Senfeng Lim. I use he, him pronouns. By day, I am a psychology professor with a specialty in developmental psychology, communication, behavioral science, and crisis de-escalation. So that's what I do by day. And then by night, I write games, and I write about a lot of things that I want people to feel. So I'm very interested in experiential gaming, feeling, that kind of thing. And I work mostly in board games, where oddly I work in IP. So I make lots of games about like Scooby-Doo, and I'm looking at things on my desks, Star Wars and stuff like that. So I get to do those games, Dungeons and Dragons. I get to work in other people's sandboxes a lot. But when I make my own games, I like to think about feelings and things like that. So not just, Chrome. So that's what I do. And I guess the two games that are most appropriate for today's talk would be Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall, which is a game about an immigrant family running a Chinese restaurant while fighting off vampires. And then the other one that is just getting published right now through, I think, Hope and Resistance is Ties That Bind, which is a game where an adversarial GM plays as a border crossing agency thing and rips families apart. So that's what that game is about. It's not super fun, but it's super fun. I don't know if it's fun, but it's a good experience. It's an experience. Everybody who's played it has said, I hate that I played it, but I love that I played it. And I think that's the best feedback I could get from that game ever. So I'm happy I made it, I guess.
I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of those feels when it comes to empathy with games, because it's not all fuzzy, happy feelings or anything like that. So, but so we're going to start off at the very basic blocks of this, and that is, what is empathy? And how do we view it in our day-to-day lives. So would anyone like to start?
I can jump in there. I think I have some thoughts. So and it's also partly comes because I used to work with Doris Roosh, who does meaningful games a lot. That's actually her focus, and these are the kind of things that we talk about often. I think when we're talking about empathy, we need to think about the fact that there's a bunch of different types of empathy, right? And there's like this empathy that kind of only exists in your head, which people often call cognitive empathy, where you're just kind of seeing a thing, and you kind of get that sympathetic, oh, I understand what's going on there, but there's some separation between you and the other person. And then there's like that affective or emotional empathy, where people are you actually kind of get into the feelings with other people. It's kind of like it's almost like you pick up their stuff and you own it as if it was yours. And then there's like that compassionate, where you're doing a little bit of both those things, but you're actually stepping up and actually trying to do something to mitigate what's happening with the person in front of you. And I think I think having a good understanding of what those things are, or at least knowing that they're out there, are a huge part of being able to make a game that will create a space to allow you to engage in empathetic conversation with another person.
Yeah, those are really good definitions of empathy in general. And I mean, if you look at developmental psychology, which is my field of study, we'd look at that in terms of like theory of mind, in terms of sense of self, sense of other, objective self, subjective self. All those things come into development of this thing we call empathy, which is kind of different than sympathy, but has links to sympathy. And so a lot of times I'm working specifically with the patient base that I work with is specifically perspective taking. Like, they can't get the perspective of others a lot of times. And so a lot of the remedial training that I'm doing is working with, how do we get people to get that point of view? So if you think about communication, and communication being, what we're doing hopefully right now, is that I have an idea and I'm communicating it to you in your head, and it should look exactly the same. I don't know, that looks more exactly the same in your head. And if it doesn't, we haven't communicated, even though one person might have tried, and you might have tried to listen, but we didn't really communicate. And so I think communication, and reading body language, facial expression, tone, cadence, all those types of things are really a big part of having that empathetic basis for everything. So it all starts and kind of ends with communication for me. And the three types of empathy, again, cognitive, emotional, and what's the last one, Alan? The actual action one. Nope. Yes, that's the compassionate one, right? So the compassionate empathy being where we're taking action. I think we start in games on more the cognitive level. That's kind of the easiest way to start. And we're hoping that, especially if you're in education or working therapeutically, that it'll start cognitive, and then eventually we'll get to that compassionate level of taking action about what you're feeling empathetic about in your community or the people that you're with.
Calvin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, building on both of those, I mean, I think Alan really laid that groundwork out. And for me, I think of it, as there's like the sort of the feeling version of empathy that a lot of folks talk about. There's then the action versions, which kind of get to that compassionate side. And then also talking about it like as a state of being, right? As someone who's not just, at this moment feeling in the position of someone else, right? But is maybe like living then, or has a kind of mode of being that is then more likely to take different perspectives or not, or more likely to be able to, or more actively or more frequently then takes those kinds of external positions or positions that other people might be in. I think so. I kind of think of it that way. I mean, I love that framework too, of that cognitive and affective and compassionate, and then thinking how much of that is, I mean, what are the action elements, I guess, of all three? What are the feeling elements of all three? And what is that kind of state of being or different mode that you're in when you're empathizing or trying to empathize or something?
Travis, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that the experts pretty well covered it.
Okay. So we're going to, oh, hold on, wrong window. We're going to start looking at empathy in the perspective of game design, and how, as a designer, or when you're looking for games, because you don't have to necessarily be a designer for this, you can look for games that either are designed to elicit empathy, or you can adjust them to elicit specific empathy. So where would you start for that? Calvin, do you have any ideas?
I guess for me, and this is maybe a broad point. Like, I don't come from a field of psychology for sure, but empathy is kind of a big term in anthropology as well. But for me, it's just I kind of recognize that like a play state is an empathetic state in a certain way, and trying to generate a play state is when someone's sort of like open to changing, not just behaviors, but then modes of behavior, I guess. And so I was maybe hinting at that before too, but when I think about empathy in play or empathy in design, it's really trying to generate that play space where you're kind of like putting self on hold and like making everything a little jello, right? Like, and that's what's going to allow you, if your systems are flexible, it can allow you to more easily take different perspectives. So for me, the beginning of empathy state is always a play state, right? I love play. I like critical play. I like meaningful play. And for me, it kind of boils down to that. Some games don't generate a play state, right? Like a maze doesn't generate a play state sometimes. Like procedural things aren't always seen that way, right? But trying to generate the play state where someone is in that, like when you hold the icon on your iPhone and everything wiggles, and it's like, are you trying to move these icons around? Like, I want to get it into that wiggle state. And then empathy is like one of those things you can kind of do from that state. So that's my first thing, is like getting in a play mode where people are in that sort of agitated or buzzed state.
Sen?
Yeah, like what you're saying, Calvin. In terms of empathy, we have to actually feel safe to be empathetic a lot of times. And one of the things that I usually try to do, and it's kind of unconscious, but if you think about like Huizinga and like, circle, the magic circle and things like that, and having people just agree that we're going to do this thing and set it up in a way where there's some preface to it that we're going to try to be empathetic. And we work on empathy. For some people, it's actually something you literally have to talk about. And for some people, it's just like, hey, we're going to play this game, and they're immediately empathetic because, as Calvin said, they've already opened their mind to be that way, probably in most everything they do in life. Whereas for some people, empathy is a real work state. Like, they have to work, and it's hard work. And we can't expect them to be empathetic right off the bat. But if we set it up with a really nice kind of framework, a circle of care, of support, with tools like we talked about in safety tools, and flexible, like Calvin said, to allow people to come in, come out, that's not for me, that is for me. That way, I think we can foster a much better sense of empathy if we start off saying, this is going to be empathetic. We're going to work on empathy in this game. And it doesn't have to be those exact words, but I think framing the game before we start will get people's expectations to the level where they're at least more willing to engage. And that's like step one, especially with people who aren't at all empathetic to whatever you're trying to work on, right? Another thing that's really important for me, particularly, to get people into that state of play and that state of immersion is basically immersion, right? I want people to be immersed in whatever world we're playing in, because if they can put themselves in the shoes of another person easily, that's like step one of well, that is what basically theory of mind is, right? That you can put yourself in the position of another person and see other people's points of view. And if we can get to a position where we're at least, there, then we can say, okay, now what does that look like if you took an action? Even if it's a fake, in your head theory, theater of mind action, what does that look like? And anything that a person can actually like articulate, that's one step closer to them actually doing it in real life. So we have to start somewhere. And I really do think that setting the stage for success is a good way to do that. And the other thing I would say is building agency into any of these situations. So the person who's playing the game, engaging with the game, isn't just watching. Because if they're just watching, then we're stuck in like the very, emotional empathy stage, the cognitive empathy stage, and not really in the actionable, compassionate working towards that. And that's really, I think, where we'd like to see a lot of the people that we're supporting go to, is that compassionate state of empathy. So yeah, set it up.
Travis, do you have anything to add?
I was going to say, I think in one of the things, I guess, to approach the baseline, not so much from a design perspective, but from a performance perspective when you're running a game, is to eliminate the communication noise that gets in the way of empathy. And that may come from rules. You might look at a system and say, well, this is going to sort of, we're going to get really bogged down as we're dealing with this, and it's going to turn into a math sim. So maybe if we're trying to focus on, generating empathy, maybe we trim the fat on this rule set, or we skip this rule over here, because we don't want to go too far into the weeds of, breaking out our calculators and sorting out the stuff. And I think some of it too is just in the narrative choices that are being made at the table. Obviously, having a system that supports that and has mechanics within it that support that is ideal. But I think just about any tabletop role-playing game you can take to that level where you're practicing empathy and exhibiting empathy in the story, as long as you can keep a handle on the immersion and eliminate as much communication as possible.
Alan?
So I guess I ultimately will echo everything that everyone has said so far, because it's all genius. But I think when I engage designing and I'm trying to do a thing that's empathetic, or that's going to initiate an empathetic conversation, it is primarily first and foremost to build an experience, right? And I have to think about what is the experience I want to connect people to, and then what can I do both in a cognitive context to create that experience, and what can I do in a somatic and physical context to give people actions that let them kind of metabolize all that stuff. That the thing that Calvin was saying, that wiggle state that Calvin was describing, I often like to think of that as less empathetic and more a pre-empathetic space, right? Because I feel like when we're creating games, we're not actually creating empathy. What we're doing is we're creating a context for it, right? I like to think of it as parables of play, right? We're creating this space where we can instigate and ping all these experiences, and then when we see people kind of power up into the experience and they're being activated, they're hitting that point of happiness or agitation, we can stop. And when we stop, that's when we have that conversation. So we're trying to create opportunities to punctuate the conversations, and it's in those conversations, one way or another, where I feel like the empathy gets trained or acknowledged or built up, and people connect to the thing.
All right. So that being said, I actually have another question that I was just thinking of that everyone kind of danced around, but never actually talked about, which is that there is this huge movement with people for pushback on making games too political or too SJW, and they don't want politics or any of that in their games. But knowing the history of games and knowing the history of some IPs, specifically X-Men, Avengers, all of that stuff, even Werewolf the Apocalypse. And how does that tie in with an empathy or lack of empathy for how those games present those situations, and maybe like what we could do better as game designers to make that clear that this is the point of the game, this is the part behind it? Anyone want to touch on that hefty one?
I'll dive into that one first. Why not? Okay, first of all, the idea that gaming has somehow ever been apolitical is just the funniest, greatest fallacy. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. But above and beyond that, I think I'm a big fan of World of Darkness going back to my high school days, and I always loved the disclaimers that came in those books, and I include very similar language in the books that I personally publish, which is just plain out putting it right out there. Look, this is pretend, and this is the point, and if you don't like it, play something else. And if your feelings are X, Y, and Z, then definitely play something else because I don't even want your money. And I don't think there's anything. I think there might be at a corporate level some companies that are resistant to that, but beyond that small handful, I don't think anyone's really resistant to making those kinds of statements in their work. And there's no reason to be. You can absolutely just be like, look, this is the way that this is intended to be presented. This is the contract we're entering in when you crack this book open. If you don't like that contract, go crack a different book open. It's cool.
I mean, as a game designer, I'm also of the mind that if you bought it, you can do whatever you want with it, right? So there's been a lot of pushback lately in the OSR trad D&D type realms where people are like orcs and orcs and orcs. And if you haven't followed that orc statement on Twitter, go look it up, because there's this whole literal diatribe and about orcs in D&D that happened maybe a month or two ago. And the thing about it is that we've always, since the inception of role-playing games, and I mean, I've been playing role-playing games for 42 years, since I was 6 years old. I started with chainmail, right? And then D&D, and then D&D before it was really D&D, and then D&D after it was really D&D. But we always change things. If you don't like it, change it. If it's not SJW enough for you, and you are a super social justice bard, go put that in the game. I'd love to see it. I'm that, so I would love to see that. But if you're not, you can also just take it out. But people are so I don't know, adamant about this kind of stuff. It's very strange to me. I take all of that stuff out if I don't like it. You can do that too. You don't have to pan the author. You don't have to pan the product. You don't have to pan the publisher. Just take it out. Or like Travis is saying, go buy something else. There's plenty of other product out there that is very neutral or on the other side of things if you don't like that kind of stuff. In our book, we literally put it right in the frontispiece. It's this game is about oppression and racism and blah, 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 blah. It's our content warning, our trigger warning, all that stuff's up there. And again, I'm sure the people who don't like that stuff will look at that and go, trigger warnings, who needs trigger warnings? And then just discount the whole book entirely. So apparently it's not written for them. So I'm not sure why they're buying it in the first place. But if they really just want a cool game with vampires and martial arts and Chinese people, you can still buy the game. It just probably wasn't written for you. And you're probably gonna have to pull out a whole bunch of stuff from it to enjoy it the way you would like to enjoy it. But guess what? You didn't write it, I did. And I'm enjoying it the way I wanted to write it. So there you go. Yeah, I don't think it's an issue for me personally. It's no skin off my nose if somebody doesn't want to read my stuff or play my games. There are plenty of other people who do, and that's actually who I am writing for. So I'm not pandering to anybody. I'm just writing the way I want to write. And I don't view that as a positive or negative. It just is.
Well, I was going to say something. It was right here in my head, and it went away. So I think that like Travis was saying, the idea that games have somehow at one point or another been apolitical is just kind of nonsense, right? I feel like there's politics and culture in every aspect of any game you're playing, right? From the narrative, obviously there's politics and culture embedded within the narrative of any given story, but there's also embedded in the mechanics, right? So there's this capacity to affirm and reaffirm our cultures in the mechanics that we choose to put in a game, and those can be big macro cultures, and they can be small micro cultures, but they're there. And anytime you have people sitting down to play something, somebody is having a more profound political experience somehow or another in that circle. You know, you might be the woman or the queer person surrounded by a bunch of bros who can't stop making jokes about your gender. You might be the one black person at the table when people are sitting down to play Call of Cthulhu in the Roaring '20s. It's going to be awesome, and realizing that, well, if I play somebody like me, it may not be that awesome, right? There's all this stuff. So there are things that are there's visible context and there's invisible context, right? And so a lot of the things that are invisible become invisible to people who've been playing it because they don't have to see it, right? They don't have to see any of those contexts or subtext. But the people who are seeing it every day, when it pops up in their game, they either have to actively do emotional labor to look away from it, or they have to actively do emotional labor to actually try to change it or make it more positive for them, or they just have to get up and walk away. So the fact that we've hit a point where we're going, oh, wait a minute, these games can actually lead to having a profound effect on people's emotional states and their well-being and how they see themselves and how they see each other. I think that's a huge evolution for us, because now we can create mindfully, as opposed to just curating the same behaviors and the same mechanics over and over again and maintaining the same cultural paradigms.
Did you have more, Calvin?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I guess like responding to that question, I mean, I would echo then what everyone else has said too, and that, I mean, that idea of politics too, like as Sen kind of mentioned, I mean, it can be specific politics or not, I guess, in a certain way, right? I mean, I have my particular personal politics, and a lot of it's like social science related. I can say these kinds of policies work better for countries. That's science, you know, this is more of a value question. I value this, you might not, sort of a thing, right? But I mean, I have, you know, when I design games coming from, you know, a particular place of like mask presenting white privilege is there, having particular neurodivergences and issues that I do too is like right there. And so like the kinds, when I'm generating empathy, I mean, I think this is great because it really, I mean, to try to connect it back to that empathy is the core. It's not always like my position so much. I guess I put on that sort of like educator thing, and it's like, let's just make this generic. Like if I can get people empathizing in general more often, that's a good political task that I'm in a position to do, right? Like if I'm not like, you know, representing certain kinds of people, I'm not representing certain kinds of political groups, I can definitely do my work in helping orient, helping equip, helping arm, putting out more games then that generate sort of like a larger, broader empathy as well. And that's, you know, political work also, right? Even if it's not specific politics, which we do slip into all of our games all the time, very deliberately and consciously. There's also just that larger project of like, as humans, I think it's beneficial for all humans to kind of get better at these kinds of things, maybe. I mean, that's a huge universal claim, but, you know, something like that, right? And that's something that I'm in a position where, you know, I can do when there's other kinds of political work that I couldn't do. And so, yeah, different games will have different kinds of those things. Like, and as Sen mentioned, like, if I see trigger warnings in a book, like, thankfully, like I don't have traumas that I really have to worry about being triggered, so I can kind of ignore those because they weren't written for me, right? But I still need to put those in my books, even if they're not for me, like they're for other people, right? So it's kind of like having that space of, you know, larger projects of empathy, I guess, where politics is sort of one part of that, and then the specific politics as well. I kind of almost keep those separate, I guess, sometimes. But yeah, always there, you know, baked into our structures for sure.
You could almost say that putting trigger warnings in books is you being empathetic towards other readers, right? I just wanted to mention two things that I did write in the chat, just in case people aren't reading it, that Monopoly is super political. If you've ever played Monopoly, you've played a political game and you just don't know it because it was actually taken and rehashed a little bit from the original design. But also there's a book called Empathy Engines by Elizabeth Sampat, which is really good. I think you buy it off her itch for like, you know, $9 or something like that. And if you're a game designer who wants to develop games that are perhaps engines for learning empathy, it's a good read. She talked in one chapter about how, you know, Sid Meier would probably not play, you know, the current version of any of his games that have his name on them because he was very much conservative, and you can see in just like SimCity and things like that. I think that's it. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, how SimCity progressed from a very conservative model, and the current iterations actually have like more liberal models of politics built right into the game, right? It's really interesting. Like, you could not before, in like the very first couple iterations of SimCity, like if you didn't fund the police, your city would die. Whereas now in current iterations of SimCity, you have to balance that accordingly. It's not so much just fund the police and everything will be okay. So those social political things are baked into some of the games that people play all the time, incessantly, and we just don't know how they reflect until you actually break them down and see, oh, that's what they're saying. This is the message they're actually saying in this game. Because if you think about how conditioning works and how we learn when we're reinforced in a lot of ways. When we're reinforced or something, we're going to learn that is the way it should be. That was the right way because we got points for it. And if you're saying that my city is going to stay together because I have a massive police force, and the game is basically saying, if your city survives, you win, then massive police force equals the win. But really, does it? Or is that just somebody's political view imposed upon this game system? So this is a really good book. You should read it.
Yeah, Alan?
I would also add to that. I think when people are struggling with this thought that things are being pushed on them, I think what's really happening is what I like to think of it as scope management, right? Where it's a scope and focus issue where we've been in some very myopic space where we're only seeing our little bit, and then something happens to make us see something that we didn't notice before, and then once you notice the one thing, all this other stuff happens. It's like when you see an ant in your kitchen, and you're like, hey, there's an ant on the floor, and then once you've focused enough to see the ant moving on the floor, suddenly you see movement in the corners, and you realize, oh, there's more than one ant. And then you're like, oh, I have to go and do something about this, right? And that pushes you to action. Or you might go, I really don't want to deal with ants. And you close your eyes and you go in the living room and play on your Xbox, right? But it doesn't stop the ants from wreaking havoc in your kitchen.
Well, and I think there's also a healthy dose of the backfire effect going on, where particularly in nerd spaces, there are people who've spent decades feeling like they're the persecuted outsiders because of their choices in media and their the games they like to play, so on and so forth. And now as the culture around gaming, I guess one could say, has become, if nothing else, more availably open over, through the internet. People are more aware of what's going on at other people's tables, I guess is what I'm really driving at. Then they're presented with, well, when this isn't a game, it causes me discomfort, which is what, for example, the orc argument boils down to. When this isn't a game, it causes me discomfort. And they're having a very hard time accepting that this thing I've been doing for fine with my friends for 30 years is not a problem. And you coming in here and saying it's a problem is a problem, is kind of their knee-jerk response. And that's, I mean, again, I'm not one of the professionals on the panel in that sense, but I imagine that's a pretty hard thing to wrestle out of someone or wrestle somebody beyond.
Yes, it's dealing with cognitive bias. It's really hard. But it's a lot of work, and a lot of the people who have those biases literally aren't willing to do the work, because to do the work means breaking the biases, and breaking the biases means actually that their whole world collapses, and they don't like that. Nobody likes that. It's a lot of emotional labor, and they would rather not do it. So we're gonna end, and that's fine for them in the game world, because you don't have to game with them. It's when they bring that out into the real world that it becomes problematic for other people who have to like deal with them on a daily basis. So, I mean, I would hope that more people would be empathetic, but it's not something everybody is. I can tell you that I was not a super empathetic person growing up until, you know, I actually became a therapist. And it's like, oh, maybe I should learn these skills that I'm trying to teach other people. So because I'm really, really good at very specific things. That's how my brain works. And so I could do all this stuff, but I really wasn't actually empathetic as a student. I was only became empathetic when I became an actual clinician. And then after I left clinical work and went back to academia, that was my goal, was, you know, I need to make sure that my students are actually empathetic before they get out there, because there's a whole bunch of missteps that I could have avoided that caused, you know, not necessarily pain and suffering, but not the best, you know, experiences with therapists when I wasn't a very good therapist starting out. I was not an expert. Nobody really is. But my wife is also a therapist, and she has that, you know, kind of listening, empathetic ear. She's always had that. And I just had the science. And so I understand how brains work. I understand how people work, but I wasn't very empathetic towards them. Anyway, the idea of people breaking down their own non-perceived bias, especially when they don't even think they have it, that's super hard work for them to do. And especially then if they then encapsulate themselves in a bubble, that makes it even harder. So exposing them to things that challenge them, like this, like what you're saying, Crystal, like comic books, how come X-Men is changing? It's like, no, X-Men isn't changing. It's always been this way. It was written specifically to be that way since the inception of the X-Men or whatever. And you're just realizing it now because now you're seeing the world in a little bit of a different way, and now your perceptions are being challenged. And a lot of people don't like it when they're challenged in any way, shape, or form. You get pushback. So.
Yeah, Alan?
So I would add to that the idea that in addition to people resisting challenge, I think there's this issue of how do I want to phrase this? There's a inequity in the narrative, right? That the people, you know, you've put a lot of your time and your energy in being and living a certain way, and then somebody says to you, "Oh no, that's not right," or there's more over here, and then there's like this weirdness, right, where you can choose to embrace this thing, but then there's a feeling of, well, what happens to all this stuff I did before, right? Does that get thrown away? Is it garbage? Does that make me a bad person? And there's the struggle, and sometimes the resistance is really people not wanting to let go of that old narrative because there's that equity in it, and there's a sensation of having to start all over again, the same way as if, you know, you're playing, you know, a 500-hour role-playing game, and you forgot to pick up, you know, an object that was going to get you through the final door, and then you have to restart everything and go all the way back. You're like, good Lord, I don't want to do that. So I think it's fair to recognize that people have those equities, and some of them are just an issue of tradition. Like, you know, they frame it in terms of this is the way it's always been. Some of it turns into like a lateral violence where they're like, well, we've done the thing for so long that you should just kind of buy into it too. And then some of it's just like, I don't want to change. Some of it's, you know, that this makes my world too ugly, and I like my white picket fences. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff swirling in there that keeps people from just saying, okay, let's run with it.
Yeah, Calvin?
Yeah, I think that's dead on. I mean, everyone's really just, I mean, we're kind of like in that empathy of the culture of gaming more than just empathy at the table, I guess now, but I mean, we're still on topic. But yeah, I like that too. And that idea that, you know, like there is something happening with those kinds of folks, right? Or it's like when your favorite little band gets famous, right? And like, you don't have that ownership anymore. It used to be your table was your table, and you could read the back of Dragon magazine and find out what other people were doing, but that wasn't real, right? Like it was very much like you owned the game and you felt like you owned it. Just like, you know, I felt like I owned Jimmy Eat World when I saw them at the skate park, you know, in Purdue or something, right? And it's like, and then when things get bigger than that, like that culture has exploded and it's not your table anymore, right? And I think, I mean, there's a lot of empathy that I think we're demonstrating empathy here as a lot of us as educators and things in ways that sometimes we don't see online, you know, for those people that are sort of sticks in the mud, right? And they can do violence and they can do harm, and that should always be fought against. But if we're trying to get them to not be that way anymore, that's going to take some professional work somehow, right? It's going to take it through these games. It's going to take it through the normalizing of trigger warnings. It's going to take it through, you know, like lots of that work and how we can shift that culture. And so, yeah, I think it's really cool just hearing these perspectives, again, from things, you know, like outside my own experience on, yeah, on what's going through some of those folks' minds, right? And that it's that personal narrative that Alan mentioned. That's identity. I mean, that's like literally their identity that they would have to change to, you know, to keep up then with these larger changes in the community and these larger changes with inclusion and more voices and more different kinds of people and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just having one of those sort of heartening moments, just hearing about people like other professionals doing this work and stuff. And I'm just kind of a flutter now. But yeah, it's just been really cool words. I've really just enjoyed hearing that last round. All three of y'all just really got me excited.
So games have the ability to create a safe space. Things like Harlem Unbound, where they actually give you permission to play the game even if it's not written specifically for you, which is 1920s Harlem with Call of Cthulhu. So which can bring up a whole mess of things, which Alan talked about earlier. But it invites people to play in that space, even if that space was not meant for them, in a way where it says, if you make a mistake, it's okay. Recognize it, do better next time, move on. And things like Love and Resistance, which I also wrote on, also does the same thing. Mine was, my mini game was, you play a parent-teacher organization and your school has a whole bunch of issues where you have to talk about it, and you play parents, teachers, or administrators. And community members. So you don't have kids involved, but you're a community member. And so you have to talk and come to a consensus in order to move forward in the game. And so these games can be created specifically to create those safe spaces in order to explore some things, or to, again, generate empathy for situations that may not be meant for you. And so I wanted to actually talk about how, as designers, we do that. Like, how would you guys open that up to make it accessible for everybody to have a safe space and have permission to maybe not make the right thing and do the right things at first, and how you'd build that into the game to help support them? It's a hefty question, so. Sen?
So in Junction, we actually hired a consultant, which is funny because both Banana and I are Chinese and we're running a game with Chinese people. But we actually hired people to help us figure out how to play a Chinese person, because it comes naturally, as you can see. Because it's not natural. And that's the problem. Alan said in another panel that we were on, which really stuck with me, Alan, that, you know, our accents aren't accents to us, right? Our accents are only accents to other people who hear us. And as I think the sole Canadian on this panel, we don't say a boot. We really do not say a boot. We say about. You just can't say it because your tongues and mouth can't make the sound. That's exactly what it is. You hear us say something different than what you say, and your brain says that's different, but your tongues and mouth can't actually make the sound we say. It's not this wild, weird sound. It's just you don't have practice doing it. And that's how accents work. Anyway, we can get into communication sciences later, but we actually wrote like a 3-page thing with James Mendes-Hodes, who's a wonderful cultural consultant. And we wrote it about how to play a Chinese character. And really, it's just like, here's some things to avoid, like tropes and accents. Just don't do them. Play as a normal person would play in the 1920s, who has hopes and dreams, has flaws and, you know, strong points. Lean into those and you'll avoid all those, you know, sore spots that can get you in trouble. So we actually build in safety tools right into the game. We include an X card in the game. We talk about lines and veils right in the rules. We talk about a debrief, you know, how to end the scenario every time with a debrief, all that kind of stuff. So I think building it in thoughtfully and purposefully, because there's a lot of people who are really just coming into RPGs now, especially in these weird COVID times, right? There's, I don't know if you know, but Wizards of the Coast had like the best month ever that they've ever had on history, on the books, in like March or April of this year because of this, right? And so we're getting more and more people joining into role playing right now. And I think we're doing some of them a disservice if we don't put this stuff in their toolkit, right? You need to give them the tools if they're going to have any hope of using it. Because a lot of people, even though the internet's a wonderful place, aren't really going to go search on the Gauntlet for all the various tools and things that they could use. So we put them right in the box. And I think we just have like broad headings like avoid stereotypes and don't use an accent, you know, don't talk about family honor. It's actually not a thing we do. Sorry to ruin that trope for anybody who thinks Asians always talk about family honor. It's actually not honor. We talk about familial duty a lot. Duty's a thing. It's not honor. We also don't talk in, they called it philosophical aphorisms. We're not like walking, talking fortune cookies, right? But that's how a lot of tropes are played in the media, like even like Mr. Miyagi or something like that, right? So that's, you know, a don't do list. And then there's a do list, like how to make mistakes safely, how to correct people kindly, right? So it's empathy on both sides. We have to be empathetic to the people who make mistakes, and the people who are making mistakes just have to be maybe a little more empathetic next time. But it's okay, and we only learn through making mistakes. And then we only learn by being taught the replacement behavior, the behavior we should do instead of the one that we did do, right? We also have rules on how to play a person who's worked in the service industry. And as somebody who has never worked in the service industry, this was really important for me because I didn't understand, you know, yeah, you're going to be run ragged. You're going to be tired. You're going to have people yelling at you from the kitchen and people yelling at you from the, you know, the serving room, and customers like yelling at you for things. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting stuff in our book just to kind of set that stage as empathetically as possible, but then also give you tools to communicate when, you know, there is transgression or boundaries are being broken. So sets the boundaries and gives you tools to deal with things that happen if the boundaries kind of get obliterated, because it'll happen.
Anyone else have anything to add?
No, I think that first of all, everything that Sen said was awesome. Absolutely, 100%. I think that if you can build in mechanical rewards that are like material of some sort to whatever behavior you're trying to, you know, foster, players will do it. You know what I mean? So if you can build in a way to, you know, like having a hard time thinking off the top of my head from something that, you know, creating from the void of no system to tack it on. But, you know, if you wanted to set up a thing where in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, if you correct yourself when you make a mistake, you gain advantage on your next roll or something like that. You know what I mean? Obviously, as we've talked about on the safety tools panel, if somebody, you know, wants to abuse a system like that, they're going to abuse a system like that, but they're probably going to abuse any other system you put in front of them as well. You know, I don't think that should be enough to single it out. But creating some sort of tangible benefit to avoiding the behaviors that aren't desirable and to engaging in the behaviors that are, I think is important. And I also, the other thing that I was rattling around the back of my head, that's why I was having a hard time making words come out of my mouth when I first started talking, was with regards to the people who are opposing the inclusion of things like safety tools and empathy and, you know, decency in games. I think part of the approach to reaching folks like that as well is, you know, taking the types of material, because this is again a point we discussed on the safety tools panel, taking types of material that are challenging, problematic, difficult, dangerous, you know, and then folding those tools into that sort of stuff and saying, you know, here you go. You can go play, you know, vicious, horrible, inhuman monsters in your story, but here's how you keep the players safe while you're doing it. You know, here's where you put the bumpers on, and feel free to go wild in between them. I think that might be a better way to approach that kind of resistance. That's all.
All right, so taking the fact that we're all game designers, we've all worked on writing games at some point. Let's step away from that, and let's say you pick up a game yourself. How would, and you can use a specific game if you have something in mind, or if you have anything, general tips on how you can use it to adapt to creating empathy if there isn't empathy written in it, or maybe it's the wrong type of empathy you want to elicit. So for instance, the first thought that I came is the old school Warhammer mentality and how to move away from that. Specifically, I'm thinking of that because of I've been playing Wrath and Glory a lot, and we have definitely moved away from that old school mentality. So,
okay, Alan, you go ahead and go first, because I have a whole prepared diatribe here for Warhammer. But
Go ahead. I'll listen to your diatribe and then add my own.
So I think the first thing about, say, if I'm going to sit down and run, I'm going to run some Warhammer. The first thing I'm going to do is try to run it in the spirit it was actually created, as opposed to the crap that got bolted onto it by the community. It is satire 110%, and finding those elements. And this is a kind of thing I think that maybe I have done my whole life and never thought about until very recently, which is you when you're reading something, you latch onto those elements that are speaking to you, and then you amplify those when you're introducing it to someone else, right? And so for me, a Warhammer game would definitely be about steering 120% into the satire, making sure that, you know, when bad things are happening to the bad people, they're happening in these huge cinematic, you know, really exciting sort of ways, so that you're really drawing a lens on, like, this is poetic justice. This is, you know, we're glad that the Emperor's, you know, regiment has exploded. They're bad people. Same thing with like rifts or something along those lines, right? You know, there's a lot of ground for that. Even I did a D&D campaign that I released through the Dungeon Masters Guild called Yearning to Breathe Free, which I don't know that I could have been more on the nose titling it, but it's, you know, the content of the campaign is about a group of, there's a murder takes place in Waterdeep, and ultimately tieflings as a whole start getting blamed for it. So you start having this sort of racially motivated, you know, quest against them happening, being run by religious zealots in Waterdeep. And then you as the players have to try to help move them around and get them to safe places, and help find ways to, you know, deal with, do you clear the names of the people who did it, even if you, who didn't do it, but were framed? Even if you do, does that matter? All those sorts of questions being introduced. And you introduce that through the narrative and through the text. So I would say, I guess the short way to that long, or through that long answer, is look at the text and find the things to hang your story beats on that elicit that sort of response, and then, you know, gloss over or ignore or check or change the ones that don't.
Alan?
So all of that, plus, I guess the way I would frame some of that though is, if I'm picking up a game to play with an existing group, I already know what works with that group. At least I have an idea. So but for me, like prior to coming into game design, I was a youth worker for about 12 years. And so I used role-playing games all the time with the kids to give them activities and have conversations. And so one of the things that I regularly found myself doing was looking at density of rules. So the more complex and dense the rules were, typically the less elegant the rules were. And I found that elegant rules shape change much faster than dense rules. And so if I could figure out what the rules that the game is using are trying to accomplish, I can strip down all the junk and get to the core set and focus in on that. I can also focus in on what resonates with the people that I play with and elevate those pieces, those rule pieces, and attach things to them to try to make them more elaborate, more engaging. Let them touch in on the things that the people that I'm working with are excited about. I would also do what Travis was saying, which is check the context, right? Like if the narrative that's wrapped around a set of rules is bad or problematic, the rules can be the most beautiful rules in the world. But if the narrative is crap, then everyone is affected by that taint. You can extract it to a certain extent. Like I'll admit to something I don't think I've ever admitted to in public. That back in the early 90s, I ran for the kids in my youth program for about 3 months a Cinnabar campaign. So if you're familiar with Cinnabar, it's one of those notorious game systems, right? But my kids saw the game and they saw they can be dragons, they can do all this stuff, they can do millions of points of damage, and they were in, right? But I had no idea of how to run that monstrosity. So I listened to what it was that they were interested in, found those bits, shaved off all the junk, added my own pieces to it, and then gave them an easy point of access. Because I knew immediately, as soon as they had to think in terms of logarithms to understand the damage system, that I was going to lose them. I had to find ways to make it easily accessible to them, so that we weren't being distracted by the mechanics, just being distracted by the narrative, and we're not getting into rules fights and whatnot. And we could just focus on the narrativistic experience that we want to have. So I think there's a lot of shaving down and building up that needs to happen. And I think that was the beauty of back in the day, and like early D&D. Like I was a white box D&D kid, and then onto the colored boxes, and then like eventually the books. But what was nice about D&D back in those days was that it wasn't really a complete rule system, right? It was a bunch of good ideas that had been duct taped together and set on fire and rolled down the hill. And you basically ran with it. You grabbed the pieces that work with you, and you've fashioned it to work for your group. So if you were going from house to house to play D&D, everybody played that game differently. No, there are no two groups that, though there is overlap, there are no two groups that were playing that game differently. And the internet kind of changed that for us, right? So we're rushing towards some level of homogeneity in our play experiences, but that homogeneity isn't necessary. And being okay with the fact that we can change a game, which is funny because every game tells you just about take this and change it, but a lot of people actively resist taking the game and changing it. They want to add to it, but they don't want to fundamentally upend the structures of the game.
Calvin?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think, and this kind of goes back to something Alan mentioned earlier about the somatic element of play around the table too. And this came in my head when Travis was talking about that idea of like what reward you give. Ansen mentioned that before. I just take what all you guys do and I repackage it. But about the idea of reaffirming certain behaviors, right? So I recall a certain time at a convention game where I kind of veiled something out, like I veiled out any kind of like murder hobo violence, right? Like I took away the affective joy they would get from slaughtering a village, right? Like, you don't get to describe the guts pouring out of the, elderly running from the town hall. Like, nope, you murdered that village. Okay, the village is gone. I marked it off the map. What do we do now, right? And they were kind of like, wait, what? And I mean, I was doing it very consciously, but I didn't do it, I make it really a teaching moment. I just kind of gave them, I just sucked out that affective joy, and they were kind of like, wait, what? And then they never did it again, right? Their behavior changed instantly when they're like, oh, we don't get to have that kind of fantasy. And I was like, nope. And they're like, oh, I guess we'll have to do something else. And they literally became like, you know, it was a 4-hour little session, but then they turned into practical saints after that, right? They're like, oh, I guess I'll have a different fantasy, orientation, different fantasy, right? And so it was just sort of a somatic check. I didn't let them have that affective pleasure. And not that, I don't imagine they're actual serial killers, right? I mean, that was that fantasy space of power fantasy, right? Like, but I was just like, no, we're not gonna, you can't have that kind of power fantasy here, right? And that was, I guess, just one thing that popped in my head is like something you could do with any game. You can just kind of, if you're not gonna change rules, because maybe you're not savvy enough or you don't know the system enough or something to change it, find ways at the table where you can affectively change that reward system or something too, might be able to work out. Just popped in my head about your question, Crystal.
Senfeng?
So some of the things that we've done in specifically Zhangshi, because it was something that people actually like railed against during the campaign. And I mean, when I say railed against, I mean 5 or 6 people were vocal. And we don't actually have combat rules. We have no combat rules in the game at all. I'm in fact writing a scenario right now to put combat rules, just little bits of combat for those people who like say, you know what, I'm a martial artist, I train martial arts, I'd like to use that knowledge in the game somehow. Okay, here's a little bit. But we did it because we want people to understand that. I mean, so I'm a martial artist. I've studied martial arts most of my life, but not everybody who looks like me is, just because they look like me, right? And that's the problem. And so we stripped that right out of the game so that it wouldn't be a thing that we even dealt with, except until people started talking about it. And so the idea of finding things that you can take out so that you can really, really focus on the things that are either resonant with people or that you really want them to engage with. That's what's important, I think. So we took out combat. We took out all these things. They're just like dice checks. That's it. It's not like these elaborate rules and tables and weapons that do different d6s of damage or whatever. None of that. It's just, did you hit them or not? And if you did, something happens. We can describe that based on the epicness of your hit. Good, done. And if players want to delve into more combat, they're welcome to try. But the game system isn't set up for that. The game system is really set up to deal with oppression. It's to say the Zhangshi, the night hopping vampires that come after you, they are representative of oppression that happens to immigrant families. All immigrant families have this vampire thing that's sucking their energy out of them. And if you understand the lore, know the lore of Chinese hopping vampires, they don't really suck your blood. They suck your chi, which is kind of your energy, and they your heatiness. It's your heat. And they suck that out, and then you feel really lethargic and kind of and drained, which is how I've been feeling all this COVID period, especially when all the stuff came out about all the things that happened in various cities around the US. And I'm not even from the States, and it like literally drained me of the will to be happy. I was super unhappy. I would have days on end when my neck just hurt because my jaw was clenched because I wanted to yell at somebody and I knew nothing would happen. And so in our game, back to the game, we pull all the extraneous stuff out, like Alan was saying, so that we can focus on, this is what we want you to engage with. Now, we don't really hit you over the hammer by saying, this is what we want you to engage with. We just don't have other things in there. You don't get to engage with martial arts. You don't get to engage with, the fact that, you think whatever about Chinese people. You don't get to engage with that. You get to engage with, racist police action. You get to engage with, the Chinese Exclusion Act. That's what you're going to get to engage with. And so you can write systems that do that. You can write adventures. Adventures are literally agendas. Like if you ask me what's my socialist agenda, it's that adventure I wrote, because that is what it is. It is an agenda of things that your characters are going to go through. You can go here and there with them, but here's some of the broad points that the GM is probably going to hit during that adventure. The other thing that I did want to talk about is agency and agency in storytelling. I think if we railroad people too much and if we hit them over the head with too many, social warrior hammers, whatever, I don't know what to call them, that's when people are going to like really go, oh, I see what you're doing and I am rebelling against that just on principle. You know, whether or not they had fun during the game or not, they're just going to do it on principle because I'm not succumbing to your, you know, your feminist agenda or whatever agenda they think we have. So I think allowing people agency within a system to make some choices, to you know, do things that they want to do, gives them that feeling of immersion that they're just going to let stuff happen. And so part of it as like an educator or as a writer who wants people to experience very, very specific experiences. And I develop games strictly on experience. That's what I want. You need to experience this thing. I believe all games are basically experiences packed up in a box and handed to you to experience the way that I wanted you to do that. That's what I hope. RPG is a little bit less for some reason because you can take rules in and out and the game doesn't break. But the idea that if a person has agency within that, I think they're going to be more willing to engage because they'll have choice, they'll have power, they'll have those things, things that matter in the system to them. They'll be able to express themselves within the system and therefore hopefully be more willing to take what the author is trying to pass on, the information, the author is trying to give them, the insights about whatever it is, racism, sexism, orcs are humans too, or extra people too, whatever it is that you want to talk about. I think that's there. But again, a lot of people are getting a lot better at seeing these things as, oh, this is a social justice trick. You guys are trying to pull a fast one on me. So just got to be aware of all that.
Yeah, Calvin?
Yeah, I mean, just a quick thing off of that. I mean, there was a whole generation of educational games that completely failed, right? Because people don't learn that way, right? And I think this kind of just goes back to that idea of a play state. Like, yeah, if you can get someone in that state where they are now open to new experiences, where they can even have one, you want to generate goals. You want them to be able to empathize with other people's goals, right? That gets into that perspective taking sort of spot of, you know, like trying on donning a new agenda or a new goal that they might not have had before is like one kind of empathy, but also then giving them a space where they can make their own, right? Games where you allow them to generate their own meaning are the games when they're going to learn and change from. Yeah, if it is this sort of heavy-handed thing, that comes in as content and they can resist content. It doesn't come in as mode, experience. You know, that state is, you know, you have to give them the freedom to generate that and potentially maybe not empathize the way you want them to, right? If it's just pure content coming at them, specific types of things, yeah, it's that wall just goes right up, right? So when Sen was talking, it made me think of just, you know, all those games I had to play like in elementary school that nowadays current educational theory would have been like, yeah, that's called prison. That's not like, that's like literally the mindset of torturing a child, right? To go through those painful brain states. That's not what learning is. That's literally the opposite of it. That's, you're giving them a pain state. Like, and yeah, we have to give them that freedom, right? We have to give them the agency to potentially not empathize, or the empathy that's there is never going to be maybe that impactful experience of empathy.
Yeah, Alan?
I just want to add on that because Calvin totally hit something that was one of my pet peeves for a long time as my kids were coming up. The way that so many educational games are made, they're so painfully didactic, right? And it is a railroading, and as Sin was saying, just giving people that agency, right? I firmly believe that play is a permission state. When you get people into a space of play, they're giving you as a person guiding that play a certain level of permission and trust to help move them through an experience, you know, but they need enough room to both succeed and fail and do something that exists somewhere in between, right? So I feel like that learning is all emergent, and you have to give them sufficient amounts of content so that they can play with those pieces, find the overlaps, and have an emergent moment, but not so much that they're distracted by the pieces, right? If they're distracted by the pieces, then they're just swirling. It becomes purely masturbatory, and they're not going anywhere. And then I think as a game designer, there's this thing that I try to drive home on all my game dev students. You don't ship with your game, right? There's not a little mini version of you that's going to be sitting on everyone's shoulder that's telling them exactly how to parse all the information that's coming at them. So you have to create interactions, you have to create narratives, you have to create all these things that help to explain to people what is the best path best path, but not necessarily the correct path, right? There's not always a correct way in a role-playing game. There's just a way, and there are the ways that we incentivize, and then there are the ways that we don't. But sometimes the ways that people discover that you didn't plan on them having, those are the ways that they need, right? They're acting out their own desires, as it were, to build a connection with that thing that that they need to connect to. That's how they build that empathy.
Okay. So one last question before we have to wrap up this panel is, why is this important? Why is empathy in gaming important? And this could be personal, it could be broad. It is your choice. So this will be our last question for the panel before I wrap everything up. Who would like to go first? All right, Travis.
I've always likened gaming, role-playing games specifically, to sitting around the campfire, which humanity's been doing since we've been humanity. You're sitting around the campfire telling stories with your friends at the end of the day, and it's an important enough activity in and of itself that we've been doing it as long as we've been Homo sapien. So I think that sharing a space with people who are willing to sit with you at your campfire, you owe it to yourself and to them to exhibit empathy. And I think one of the best ways to, regardless of what system's sitting in front of you, one of the best ways to bring forth empathy at your table is by exhibiting it. So that would be kind of my final thought, I guess, on it and on why it's important.
Alan?
So I guess for me, it's back to this idea of play as a parable, right? That we're creating tool sets for people. I feel like the greater the greater the number of experiences that you have that give you a mnemonic recollection and an emotional recollection of having overcome hardship, of having shared space with people, those parables travel with you, and you'll be surprised where in a given situation they'll pop up and you go, oh wait, this is like, and the connection is made. The connection's not always made at the gaming table. The connection might be made, a week later, 10 years later, right? But it gets added to your toolbox, and without that, you're just kind of repeating the same old traditional structures, and you're not growing. You're just in a space of stagnance.
Calvin?
Yeah, I guess for me then, empathy in gaming, empathy in math is kind of harder sometimes. Like you can have empathy in literature. A quote that really stuck with me like years ago was about, fiction is the only place you can experience the mind of another person. And I always kind of liked that, just that idea of, the sort of the magic of literature. Travis hit on storytelling, right? That storytelling is important. You can talk about theater, empathy in the theater, but in gaming, like you're the audience and the storyteller, right? You're the performer and the audience at the same time. And so like, if we're gonna have like a place or a hobby or a domain for empathy, like it's gonna be game, it's gonna be play, it's gonna be, those around those campfires, and then, playing tag in the fields and stuff, right? So I think if we as like designers and participants in this culture aren't doing it, that's terrible for our culture, right? Like this is the spot to do it in. So I think it's just, I'm glad that it's here, right? I'm glad that things like that can happen, because it's much harder to do in other subjects in other places, and even like when I taught intro to expressive culture or something at a university, and I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to watch Britney Spears videos today, and we're going to talk about sexism in that Luke Bryan country video or something. And my buddies that were teaching chemistry are like, darn it, I don't get to talk about that in my chemistry classes. And it's like, they're like, I want to change the world too. And it's like, well, gaming is a good spot for us to do that, right? So I just think it's kind of cool, that it is so visceral, that it is so somatic, that it is about storytelling, that it is about performance. So I think we have to do it, right? This is a spot where we can have an impact. So I think we really have to.
Senfang?
I guess my last thing to say about empathy is that it is lacking in the world today in a lot of ways. I think there are people who are disconnected from other people without even knowing they're disconnected. given that we're doing stuff like this, these big Zoom calls and whatnot. And I know people, and I'm one of them, who, like, if you call me, I am not picking up my phone, but if you text me, I'll text you right back. And so there's this weird thing that is going on with how we communicate these days. And play is something that we actually have more time to do now than ever before. And so while all play doesn't have to be focused on the hard, empathetic, emotional labor that we always talk about, why not? As I think Tanel said in the chat, like, why not empathy? Why not work on it? Why not use games as a vehicle to better ourselves, not just to pass our time? As a therapist, my modality is occupation. So I'm an occupational therapist, and I work with people on their pastimes. How do you pass your time? Okay, let's use that to figure out how to get you back to work or into a better state of health or well-being or whatever. And so if gaming is your way to pass your time, you can also use it for lots of other cool things. And empathy is one of the most valuable things I think we'll have in our lives as we get older, as we have kids, as we have more people that rely on us, as we have more connections with more people that are actually less, but we have more of them. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have more. I now have connection with all 5 people who I can see here, or 4 people, but they're not as strong as maybe they could be. Right? I talk to Crystal almost every day on a specific chat. I talk to Alan a lot, and now I'll probably talk to Calvin and Travis, but it's still not the same as the people who are, like, right next to me. But even now, we don't have that. So I think empathy is a really good place to start. And if you look at a lot of the problems that are happening in the world right now, specifically with, what's happening in America, with the, upcoming election and things like that, I really think empathy's at the bottom of a lot of those problems. And I say that as, watching from America's hat. I'm sitting up on top of America as America's hat, looking down. Not in a negative way, not down my nose, but just like, what is happening with you people down there? And I'm sure you could say the same thing about Canada. You look up and you go, oh, be more empathetic towards, say, the Indigenous population that lives in Canada, right? Because we've made mistakes too. And I think empathy stems from a lot of that, is recognizing that you have made mistakes and what are we going to do about it, without breaking that whole idea that Calvin and Travis were talking about. Like, okay, we've got these walls that we've built up, and if I break them, I've just ruined my whole world. I think we've got to get better at that. And Scott Nicholson, if you know who Scott Nicholson is, Scott on Board Games, I can't remember what he called himself, way back when. He was like the very first reviewer of board games on YouTube. And Scott's a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University, just down the street from me, where he teaches game design. And his class is called, or his lab is called, Game Designs to Change the World. And it sounds like ostentatious until you see what those students are doing. And I'm sure, Alan, you see your students doing the same, where people are making games that, maybe don't fit the mold of a traditional game, but who cares? They're engaging, they're in a mode of play, but you're learning something, you're teaching something, you're doing something that is going to make you better, and then you therefore will make the world better. And I think that's why empathy is important.
All right, so to wrap up, I would like to give each of you the opportunity to tell us where we can find more information about you, connect with you on social media, and all of that fun stuff. So I'm going to start with, let's do Calvin.
I am online under Anthropos Games. So whatever you type into Google, it will take you there. Anthropos Games on Twitter, on Facebook, and .com.
Awesome. Senfong?
You can reach me most likely at Senfong Lim on Twitter, and that's SENFOONG. Dot's on something else. LIM. Or if you want to see a weekly webcast on Facebook about game design, you can watch the Meeple Syrup Show at Meeple Syrup on Facebook.
Alan?
It's easiest to catch me at Council of Fools, which is my Twitter account. I also have a blog, which is council-of-fools.com/blog. And that's just where I kind of spill my brains long form on a semi-regular basis.
Travis?
I'm at Travis Legge, Legge, pretty much everywhere on the internet. The only other names I operate under is if you look me up on Twitch, it's Plastic Age Plays, like Silver Age except plastic. And you can often see me on the Onyx Path Twitch channel as well, running games and doing stuff there.
Awesome. And I'm Crystal Mazer. You can find more information about where I've published at thegeekypanda.com. You can also find me on all social media for Body and Soul 152. And I just want to thank everybody for this amazing panel with so much information. And I have a panel proposal for play. So that'll be hopefully coming up at some point with Bodana Group. Because I think play also ties so much into empathy. And yeah, I'm very passionate about that. I can speak for hours on that one. I probably won't moderate that one. But thank you everyone for joining me and joining all of our panelists. And thank all of our panelists so much for bringing your expertise here and your insights. So yeah, I think this is the last panel for Save Online. So, which is sad, but at the same time, yay. I'll see you guys later. So, bye.